In a forgotten corner of the city, amidst the hum of ancient machines, lived Malik, a brilliant software architect whose body waged a quiet war. His sanctuary, a digital hearth, was his last tether to purpose. But when his world plunged into sudden darkness, a fragile hope emerged from an unexpected source, challenging his profound isolation. The digital hearth was less an internet cafe and more a museum of forgotten technology. It was a sanctuary of humming fans and the faint, sweet smell of aging plastic. And for Malik, it was the last place on earth he felt he belonged. At 38, he carried a bone-deep chill that no worn-out sweater could ward off, a constant companion to the gnawing fatigue that came with late-stage HIV. His mind, a palace of elegant logic and clean code, was trapped in a body staging a slow, quiet rebellion. He leaned in, his voice a low, patient murmur against the cacophony of clicking keys and distant video game explosions. Easy Leo just extrude along the y-axis, gently. The boy beside him, a lanky 14-year-old with more nervous energy than focus, fumbled with the mouse. On the screen, a crude 3D shape contorted unnaturally. Malik didn't sigh. He never sighed at them. 11 years ago, a diagnosis had vaporized his career as a brilliant software architect, leaving behind only the ghosts of what-ifs. Here, in this dim corner, teaching neighborhood kids free software on donated hardware, he could almost forget the sting of a world that had deemed him too risky, too fragile, too much. His own machine was a relic, a tower case held together with silver duct tape, its insides a Frankenstein's monster of scavenged parts. But it worked. It was his conduit, the tool that allowed him to translate the pristine architecture in his head into something tangible for these kids. He was guiding Leo through the final, crucial step of a simple render, the part where the dull gray mesh would hopefully bloom into a shaded, solid object. "Okay, now hit F12, Malik said, a flicker of anticipation in his chest. Leo pressed the key. For a single, hopeful second, the fan inside Malik's monitor whined to a higher pitch. Then came a faint pop, less a bang and more a tired, final sigh. The screen, which had long since faded to a jaundiced yellow, convulsed in a brief spasm of static. Then it surrendered to an unyielding, absolute black. The ambient noise of the digital hearth didn't change, but for Malik, a profound silence descended. He stared into the dead, reflective surface, seeing only the ghostly outline of his own gaunt face. It wasn't just a piece of hardware that had died. It was his voice, his purpose, his last fragile tether to the man he used to be. He slowly lowered his forehead until it rested on the cool edge of the desk, the crushing weight of that sudden, empty blackness pressing down on him. Across the room, hunched over a sticky keyboard under the unforgiving buzz of a flickering fluorescent light, Rosa felt a familiar knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. Her own second-hand laptop, her lifeline and portal to the future, had given up the ghost 3 days prior, its motherboard fried beyond repair. The acrid smell of burnt electronics still lingered in her memory. Now, with the early application deadline for a top-tier computer science program looming just 1 week away, the digital hearth and its hourly rate computers were her only option. A desperate, last-ditch effort that felt like trying to build a rocket ship with popsicle sticks. It was from this vantage point of quiet desperation that she had first noticed Malik. Initially, he was just a persistent, low-humming presence in the corner, a man who seemed both deeply ingrained in the place and oddly out of time. But Rosa, who had spent the last 4 years devouring every coding tutorial she could find online, quickly realized she was witnessing something extraordinary. He wasn't just a kind-hearted volunteer. He was a master operating in exile. She watched, mesmerized, as he guided a fidgety young girl through the logic of a for loop, not with dry commands, but by having her imagine she was a tiny robot methodically placing a single candy on a row of desks. She saw him explain recursion in Python, using the analogy of a set of Russian nesting dolls, each one holding a slightly smaller version of the same secret. He made it feel like magic, not math. It was genius, distilled and delivered with a quiet grace that was completely at odds with his dilapidated surroundings. So when Malik's monitor went dark, Rosa felt it like a power outage in her own chest. She saw more than just a machine dying. She saw a light being extinguished. She watched the man's shoulders, which he usually held with a quiet, rigid dignity, slump forward. He didn't curse or hit the desk. He just folded inward, his hands coming up to cover his face in a gesture of silent, profound despair that cut through the room's electronic din. It wasn't the anger of a momentary setback. It was the crushing weight of a final straw. It was a raw, unguarded moment of hopelessness, and it resonated with a painful frequency inside her. The image of his surrender seared itself into her mind. Her gaze flickered from his bowed head back to the glowing screen of her own rented computer. Her half-finished personal essay stared back at her, its prompt a cruel irony. How do you hope to use technology to create change in your community? She had been writing about abstract ideas, bridging digital divides, empowering local businesses with open-source tools. But looking at Malik, a man pouring out his immense talent for free into the lives of kids who had nothing, she realized the answer wasn't an abstract concept. It was a person. It was him. And he was breaking. After a long moment of internal debate, Rosa pushed back her chair. She walked over to the vending machine, her last few dollars rattling in her pocket, and bought a steaming cup of tea she couldn't really afford. She approached Malik's corner, her heart thumping a nervous rhythm against her ribs. He was still motionless, his face hidden. "Excuse me," she said softly. Malik flinched, his head snapping up. His eyes were guarded, weary, a wall of practiced indifference thrown up against a world that had taught him to expect the worst. He looked at the cup she was holding out, then at her, his expression a mixture of suspicion and confusion. "You look like you could use this," Rosa said, placing the cup on the desk beside his inert keyboard. Instead of directly mentioning the broken monitor, she pivoted, feigning a problem of her own. I'm stuck on something, for my university application. It's an algorithm problem, and I keep hitting a wall." She pulled a crumpled napkin from her pocket, where she'd been sketching out her failing logic. Malik stared at her for a beat, his internal shield still raised. But the language of the problem, the familiar shape of the challenge, was a siren's call to the architect inside him. He took the napkin. His long, thin fingers, trembling slightly, traced the flawed diagram. Within minutes, he had picked up a pen and on the other side of the napkin, sketched out a new, breathtakingly elegant solution. He didn't just fix it. He revealed a more beautiful way to think about it. Seeing that spark of his true self, Rosa knew she had to press her advantage. "Mr. Malik," she began, her voice gaining a sliver of confidence, "what you do here, it's more important than any of my application essays." She took a deep breath. "I want to start an online fundraiser, to get you a new computer, a proper one." The wall in his eyes went back up instantly. "No," he said, the word sharp and final. "I don't take charity." The word hung in the air, heavy with years of accumulated slights and the fierce, tattered remnants of his pride. "It's not charity," Rosa insisted, her voice earnest, pleading. "It's an investment in us, in all the kids you teach. Your knowledge, it deserves a better vessel, a better wand." The word wand hung in the air, a small, unexpected piece of poetry. It seemed to bypass his defenses, striking a chord deep inside. He looked from her determined face to the elegant solution on the napkin, then to the dark, useless screen. He didn't say yes, but he didn't say no again. He just gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. That was enough. Rosa hurried back to her station, her own urgent work forgotten. She created a GoFundMe page, her fingers flying across the keyboard. For the title, she wrote, "Help our neighborhood's code whisperer get a new wand." She deliberately omitted any mention of his health, focusing solely on the brilliance of his teaching and the inadequacy of his tools. She set a modest goal of $2,000. For the first few days, however, the response was a trickle of pity. A $5 donation here, a $10 one there. The total stalled at a disheartening $135. The stagnant progress bar on the GoFundMe page was a constant, mocking presence on Rose's screen. She shared the link with everyone she knew, posted it on community forums, and even printed out flyers that she tacked onto bulletin boards at the local library and grocery store. But the needle barely moved. She realized with a sinking heart that words on a screen were not enough to convey the quiet magic that happened in Malik's corner of the digital hearth. She needed an amplifier. Her mind raced through possibilities, and then it landed on a voice. A voice she listened to late at night when the stress of her future felt overwhelming. It belonged to Clara Vance, the host of a popular local public radio show on WPRX called Asterisk City of Echoes. Clara's program was an anomaly in the modern media landscape. It was slow, thoughtful, and dedicated to unearthing the small, resonant stories of humanity hidden within the city's sprawling anonymity. Fueled by a fresh surge of determination, Rosa spent an entire night crafting an email. It was the most important thing she had ever written, more critical than any college essay. She didn't just describe Malik's situation. She tried to paint a picture. She wrote about the hum of the old machines, the look of concentration on the kids' faces, and the sheer elegance of Malik's mind cutting through the fog of poverty and neglect. On a whim, she attached a short video she had secretly recorded on her phone a week earlier. The quality was poor, the audio tinny, but it captured a perfect, unguarded moment. Malik, patient and animated, using his hands to explain the concept of an API to a restless 10-year-old, comparing it to a waiter in a restaurant taking an order from the table, the user to the kitchen, the system, and bringing back the food, the data. Miles away, in her home office, Clara Vance was sifting through hundreds of emails, a nightly ritual that usually yielded more noise than signal. But Rose's subject line, the story of a code whisperer and his broken wand, caught her eye. She read the email, her initial skepticism slowly melting away into a deep, familiar ache of recognition. Clara, a veteran journalist whose own life had been irrevocably changed by a high school English teacher who saw a spark in her that no one else had, felt a powerful connection to the story. When she clicked on the video file and watched the grainy footage of Malik, she saw the ghost of her own mentor. She saw the same passion, the same selfless transfer of knowledge. She didn't forward the email to her producer. She didn't schedule a pre-interview. She looked up the contact number Rosa had left and, using her personal cell phone, replied with a simple text message. "I need to meet him. Bring him to the studio, Thursday night." The WPRX studio was a world away from the digital hearth. It was cool, quiet, and smelled of clean carpets and expensive electronics. Malik looked small and fragile under the soft, professional lighting, his thin frame shivering slightly in the air-conditioned chill. He sat awkwardly in the plush guest chair, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, his eyes darting around the soundproofed room as if seeking an escape route. This was a place for important people, for voices that mattered. He felt like an intruder, but when Clara Vance began to speak, her voice, so familiar to him from countless late nights listening to the radio, was not interrogating but inviting. It was a warm, calm current that gently pulled him out of his shell. She didn't ask about his problems, she asked about his passion. "Malik," she began, leaning into her microphone, "Rosa tells me you're a magician, that you can take this thing we all use but don't understand, code, and make it beautiful." For the first time that evening, a genuine light flickered in Malik's eyes. He started hesitantly, but soon the words began to flow. He spoke of the inherent elegance of a well-written script, the satisfaction of building something functional and clean from nothing but logic. He described the moment a child's face lights up in understanding as a system reboot of the soul. He was no longer a patient, a victim, or a charity case. He was an architect, a teacher, a translator of a secret language. His voice, though physically weak, resonated with an authority and passion that had been dormant for a decade. Gently, Clara guided the conversation to his past. With a quiet dignity that filled the studio, Malik spoke of his career, the diagnosis, and the slow, painful process of becoming invisible. He mentioned his illness not as a plea for pity, but as a simple fact, the pivot point upon which his life had turned. It was a part of his story, no more or less than his love for Python. As the program neared its end, Clara's expression softened. "Malik, while you've been sharing your story with us for the last half hour," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "something pretty incredible has been happening." She turned her laptop toward him. On the screen was the GoFundMe page. The number, which had been stuck at a pitiful $135 when they walked into the studio, was now spinning like a slot machine hitting the jackpot. It blazed past $5,000, then $10,000, then $15,000. Listeners from across the city and beyond, moved by his quiet brilliance and profound decency, were opening their hearts and their wallets. The progress bar was a solid, vibrant green. The total on the screen when Clara turned it to him read, $19,572. And it was still climbing. Malik stared at the number. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a dry, choked sound came out. The wall he had so carefully constructed around his heart for 11 long years didn't just crack. It vaporized. The architect, the teacher, the survivor, they all receded, leaving only a man overwhelmed and seen. He bowed his head, his shoulders shaking, and for the first time since his diagnosis he wept. Not tears of sorrow or self-pity, but tears of shattering, unbelievable gratitude. Across town, in the doorway of the digital hearth, Rosa stood with Sal, the gruff old owner. They were huddled around a small portable radio, listening. As she heard the tremor in Malik's voice and Clara's description of the soaring donations, Rosa's own tears began to fall, hot and silent, tracing paths of victory down her cheeks. The final tally of the fundraiser was an astonishing $32,450. The wave of generosity that began during the radio show continued for days, a testament to a city's capacity for kindness. The money did more than just buy Malik a new computer. It sparked a small-scale revolution in the dusty corner of the digital hearth. Sal, the gruff, quiet owner who had for years communicated mostly in grunts and nods, was the first to act. He cleared out the entire back section of the cafe, a space previously occupied by broken arcade machines and forgotten inventory. "For the kids," he'd mumbled to Rosa, a rare smile touching the corners of his mouth. For the hub, volunteers, many of whom had been listeners of Clara's show, descended on the space. They painted the walls a bright, optimistic white. An electrician rewired the whole section, installing clean, new outlets. And then came the delivery. Not one, but 6 brand-new workstations, each with a high-resolution monitor and a powerful tower PC. They christened the space Malik's Hub. A massive whiteboard was mounted on the main wall, and it was soon covered in his elegant handwriting, filled with logic diagrams and snippets of code. The hub became a beacon. The number of kids who showed up after school doubled, then tripled. They were no longer just a handful of stragglers but a proper class, a community. And Malik was no longer alone. Some of his first students, now in their late teens and early 20s and on their own paths in tech, started coming back. They'd pull up a chair, offering to help the younger kids, becoming his unofficial teaching assistants, the first disciples of his quiet gospel. Malik's body continued its slow, inexorable decline. Some days the fatigue was a lead blanket he could barely lift. But as his physical energy waned, the light in his eyes grew brighter, more intense. He knew his time was a finite resource. With a new urgency, he began to systematize his knowledge. He spent hours recording his lessons, creating a free online video curriculum that covered everything from basic HTML to advanced data structures. He was building an engine that could run without him, a legacy of logic and empowerment that would outlast his failing cells. 6 months later, Rosa found Malik in a quiet room at a local hospice. The air was sterile, but the space around his bed was filled with the warmth of his presence. She held up a thick envelope, the logo of her dream university printed in the corner. His smile was frail, but his eyes were bright with a fierce, undiminished pride. He gestured with a weak hand toward a tablet propped up on his bedside table. It showed a live feed from Malik's hub, buzzing with the chaotic, brilliant energy of a dozen kids arguing happily over a piece of code on the whiteboard. "My T-cell count is trending toward 0, Malik whispered, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. He tapped a finger on the screen where a young girl was proudly showing her project to an older student. "But my legacy count, it's hitting an all-time high every single day." Tears welled in Rose's eyes, and she fumbled in her bag, pulling out a printed copy of her application essay. "I want to read you something," she said, her voice thick with emotion. The true power of technology lies not in the elegance of its code, but in its ability to be a lamp, lit by one warm soul, to illuminate the path for countless others fumbling in the dark. In Mr. Malik, I saw that light. Malik closed his eyes. A look of profound, unassailable peace settled over his features. His work was done. The signal had been amplified and the echo was just beginning.